We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics tonight, and I thought about it because on Tuesday night we had a test, and then tonight we had a test, and I thought, this is a great idea. I haven't talked about testing in a while, and there are a few things that I always love to talk about with tests, and there are a few things that I always think about after, and I think, oh, I should have said that, I forgot this. So I'm going to tell a few stories. Some of them will be about my own tests, some of them will be about other people's tests, but I want to go from Kodo, which is one of my favorite martial arts books, just an absolutely incredible source of knowledge, and it's out of print, which is just like a sign of the horribleness of our world today. It's a great book. So there's a chapter in here on testing, and this is by Kensho Furuya, who passed away a couple of years ago, but he had an Aikido dojo in Little Tokyo for years in downtown LA. So when we test, here's one of the most interesting things about the test. And it could be a white sash test like today. Rachel and Esther took their test, and like for them, this is a hard test. Was it not a hard test? It was hard. And I told them that as I was sitting before the class, thinking about their test, I was reminded of my white sash test. And I don't remember that much about it, but I remember the time leading up to it, thinking like, I can't wait till Sifu asks me to test. I can't wait. I'm so excited for it. Remember, I was 17 years old, and I was in a different place from when most of the people in this school are when they take their test. And I was actually like offended for a while that Sifu Brown hadn't asked me to test, and it worked differently there. Then there was no like, I'm telling you when the test is, and here's the curriculum, and go study this. It was like he just pulled you off the mats randomly one night and made you take the test. So that was good and that was bad. It was good because people got more prepared for it. It was bad because they psyched themselves out. And this is what I saw all the time happening. Here, I see this all the time, is I tell people there's a test coming, and then people start to freak out. And people go like, test, I'm not ready for that. They literally tell me, I'm not ready, and I have to remind them, I don't care if you think you're ready, because I'm the one in charge, and I tell you if you're ready or not. And I know that you're ready, that's why I've asked you to take the test. And sometimes people will really psych themselves completely out, get to the point where they even get sick leading up to the test, they get injured, and it's like, it is a mess up here. That's a big part of the test. That's a fun part of the test for me. For you guys, that's the part that you need to get over. And the truth of the matter is, you are not going to be perfect in your test. You're not supposed to be perfect in the test. What you're supposed to be doing is your best. And I tell you, if you're ready to take that test at that level, and you do it. So there's a quote here. Saigo said, "Do your best and leave the outcome to heaven." And I say something like this from time to time. This idea of like, you have to do your best without being attached to the results. You do your best and you leave the rest up to God, the divine, like the forces of nature are going to propel you to where you need to go, or not. It doesn't matter. You just do your best. That's it. And don't worry about the results. Worry about the work. You do that. He says, this is just another random quote here. "We fail the most crucial tests of life. After all, we are only human. And if you were supposed to pass every single test that you took, it would not be a test. It would just be like, we'll show up and do it. But this is like, there's always this kind of innate possibility and fear of maybe I'm not going to pass the test. And some of them you are going to be really close to or just not pass it. Regardless of success or failure, if you've done your absolute best, you have passed successfully. You may not get your next rank, but you passed something. Truthfully, tests are meaningless, but because we are so lazy and sloppy, we need tests. So a test is a great opportunity for us to look at a point in time and say, I'm going to do my best to get ready for the test. And I'm going to I'm going to really just like cram. I'm going to do everything that I can do so that on this date and time, I'm the best that I can be. And it's a great opportunity. I used to look at tests that way and see, okay, so Sifu gives us, you know, the higher the rank of the test, the longer you have ahead of time to prepare for it, because some of the tests are really hard. And I'm thinking like back to my green sash test. I've been practicing for about 3 years. And Sifu says, you're gonna take this test on this date. So I say, okay, here we go. And I get all excited about it. I've been working on my form. My form looks great. It's been looking great for a year. I'm thinking, all right, so now I'm really gonna start working on a few techniques that I think I'm not as good at. So I start working on my hook kick, which I was bad at that point, and ogoshi, which is a big kind of a dangerous throw. And I just used those 3 months, and it's like those were the two things that I was focusing on. And I was doing everything else to prepare for the test, but I set out with this in mind. I'm gonna have a better hook kick and a better ogoshi at this date and time. And just all the reps and everything that I had to do to get ready for the test, sure enough, that day, those two techniques looked really good. So did everything else. So this is the beginning of the actual article that Furuya wrote. Tests of time. Testing has always been a clear-cut method to evaluate the results of a student's training. However, the method of testing today's students is considerably updated and very much different from the ancient ways. In the 16th century, Itosai Kagehisa, the founder of the Ito School of Swordsmanship, had to decide the succession of his school between his two top students. He put them to the ultimate test, a duel to the death. And unfortunately, the more evil student won decisively. Another well-known master wanted to evaluate the skill of his 3 sons. He put them to an unusual test. This is a great story. They actually put this in film in the Seventh Samurai. Anybody seen this movie? Phenomenal film. You need to watch this movie, and you'll recognize this scene. He took his 3 sons. He placed a small ball balanced delicately on a narrow ledge above the door, and called each one of his sons into his private quarters. The youngest son entered first. As he pulled back the door to enter, the ball fell and hit him on the head. Although he was caught by surprise, he was able to draw his sword and cut the ball in half before it hit the floor. It's pretty impressive. The test was repeated for the second son. As he entered the door, he was able to catch the ball as it fell. In the case of the third son, however, he carefully opened the door, removed the threatening ball from its ledge, carefully placed it on the floor, sat down, adjusted his posture, and calmly awaited his father's inquiry. The father reprimanded the youngest son for lack of training. The second son was encouraged to double his efforts in training, and the third son was complimented on his great skill and eventually inherited the school. There are some other quotes here in the side of the page. He says, nature does not test because nature is absolute. Human beings test themselves because we live in a relative world. Nature only appears to test us because we try to interpret nature in relative terms. So that's about nature and testing. The ultimate test. Sometimes the ultimate test comes from our peers rather than our teachers. Saigo Takamori was one of the great warriors during the 19th century struggle to end the Tokugawa reign and reestablish Emperor Meiji to power. As a youth, he was page to a powerful feudal lord in the Satsuma province. He showed great talent, courage, and skill in martial arts. This, of course, caused a great deal of jealousy among his peers, and they decided to put him to a true test of courage. In order to serve tea to his lord, Saigo proceeded down the long corridor of the castle, holding his lord's afternoon drink on a small tray respectively above his head. Of course, the tea was always served in his lord's favorite tea bowl, a priceless antique from China known as Heaven's Eye. Suddenly, the other pages ambushed him around a dark corner, hoping Saigo would drop the tea bowl, smash it, and get into big trouble. When the other pages leapt at him, Saigo calmly moved to the edge of the corridor, placed the tea and tray in a safe place, stood up, faced his opponents, and said, "Boy, did you surprise me. Okay, now let's fight." Sometimes, so like when we're tested in here, I give you guys a piece of paper, and it tells you what's going to be on the test, right? And sometimes you get tested in ways that are not given to you on a piece of paper, like tonight's class, where Dina and some of the other senior students got to teach class. And I say got to teach class, and I mean that. It may have occurred for some of them like, I have to do this right now. I can't believe Sifu's making me do this. This is terrible, and I'm mortified. And sometimes senior students feel that way for a long time about teaching class. And some people get it. They understand that this is a great privilege to teach class, and to be asked to teach class means that I trust you to a certain point. And you are going to be surprised from time to time in class. Now, you're not going to be surprised like you walk in the dojo and I jump out at you with a sword, and like, you're going to be surprised like the thing that we did in class today. I've never done that before, and I have no idea how to do it. Or you're going to be surprised when I tell you to test way earlier than you think you're supposed to test. Or you're going to be surprised when you show up for that test and I have you do something that you didn't prepare for. But you're going to be prepared-ish. The point is that the surprise is a function of where our minds are at. And if you go into something and you think you know what it's going to be, you go into a test, or you go into class, or you walk into the DMV, like you think you know what it's going to be, that's the moment that you stop being present. That's the moment that you stop, doing your best at whatever it is you're doing. I was walking down the street. No, I was at dinner a couple of nights ago over by Abbot Kinney, and I see all these cop cars and fire trucks and ambulances going by, and there were like 10 of them, and it went on for 10 minutes. And I'm just thinking, like, something crazy's going on. And sure enough, I'm walking down the street, and I walk up towards it, and I see they're all there with the sirens on. There's a car that has jumped the curb and crashed into one of the bars there, the Brig, and it was just like through the window, I think. And there was another car that was flipped on the road in the middle of Abbot Kinney. Now, if you've ever been to Abbot Kinney, this is not a road where you're speeding on. There's like nobody there at this time of night, thank God. It was very late. But I don't know what these people were doing exactly that caused this to happen, but they must have really not been paying attention. And you know that one of them was like texting or doing something completely ridiculous, because to flip your car on Abbot Kinney means that you are absolutely not present. And this is what we do. Like, we get in the car and we think, well, I know what driving is. I know how this is going to go. It's okay if I text. It's okay if I'm not paying attention. I'm playing with the radio, whatever. And then somebody swerves in front of you, and I don't think anybody died, thank God. But it was like, that's insane. So always be ready for a surprise. And this is one of the things that our training teaches us, is that you never really know what's going to happen. When you go to spar later on as a more advanced student, I mean, they might throw the front punch, they might throw the reverse punch, they might throw the uppercut, they might throw the front kick, they might throw the hook kick, they might try to push you, they might try to throw you on the ground, they might try to yell at you. Like, you don't know what they're going to do. They could do anything. And so you have to be in this mental place where you're ready for it all. And this is what the wall scroll means, Mushin. Mushin, no mind, is not a place where I'm mindless. It's a place where I am completely mindful and focused on this moment and clear, so that anything that happens completely fills my consciousness. And now in that moment I can respond well to whatever it is. And it's not always like there is one right way to respond. When the car swerves in front of you, maybe you stomp on the brakes, maybe you swerve to one side, maybe you swerve to the other side. Maybe you have to keep going in a straight line, like who knows? But there's responding well, and then there's what these people did, which was freak out and like go off the side of the road and flip their car. So I suggest breathing and meditating on a regular basis so that this becomes a natural thing for you to get your mind back in that state. This is one of my favorite stories about testing, and this reminds me a lot of some of my tests. Water bucket training. The most unusual test, I believe, was known as water bucket training. A teacher who had no heirs wanted to decide which of his students would best succeed him. He finally narrowed it down to 3 students, but the decision was still a difficult one to make. He finally asked all 3 of these students to come to the backyard of his home early the next morning. He explained to them that they were about to undergo an unusual form of training, and the one who succeeded would eventually become his heir. The students were, of course, rather pleased and excited about this prospect. Each of the 3 students was handed a water bucket, and a huge water barrel was placed in front of each one of them. The teacher explained that the first one to fill up his barrel with water from a nearby well would win. On the order to start, all 3 ran to the well to draw water to fill up his barrel. Much to their surprise, however, when they poured the water into the barrels, they found the water rushing out at the bottom. When they looked inside, they discovered, much to their shock and anger, the barrels had no bottoms. What a hopeless test, they thought. Still, each student decided to humor the teacher, so they all exhausted themselves throughout the day and night pouring water into the bottomless barrels. At dawn of the next day, the teacher came out to inspect the results and declared that each one failed because not one barrel had been filled to the top with water. The students protested angrily, and finally the teacher conceded, saying, "I'm willing to give each one of you one more chance. Everyone come tomorrow morning." They all arrived early the next day. As before, the huge water barrels were brought before them. They immediately checked the barrels and found that they had been fixed with bottoms. They all felt assured. They were shocked, however, when they were handed buckets which had no bottoms. It was humiliating enough to try to fill a barrel with no bottom, but now they had to use bottomless buckets. How can anyone carry water in a bucket with no bottom? 2 students threw down the buckets and left in disappointment. The 3rd student decided to follow his teacher's instructions and began to lower the bucket into the well and carry it over to the barrel. Although a bottomless bucket can't carry much water, a few drops remained on the side and went into the barrel. After great effort, a few drops at a time, the barrel was filled with water. He was chosen as the successor, and indeed he was the best choice of all. And he goes on to say, nowadays teachers normally judge the results of training. In ancient days, I think teachers judged the student's capacity for training. A student without the proper attitude for training is like a bottomless barrel. He retains nothing. A student with a proper attitude towards training, even if he's nourished with a bottomless bucket, retains the tiniest bit of knowledge, a few drops at a time, and eventually attains mastery. Years ago, teachers did not train many students and sometimes put everything at stake on one special student. Because of this, the teachers of old continued to test the characters of the students so critically. Each student achieves a mastery and understanding of the art which is always slightly different from his teacher. Eventually, the student may go his own way, but at the same time, it's important to maintain the age-old traditions which helped cultivate the proper environment for learning and the fertile fields in which the student grows and matures. This is how it was done in the times of old. So this story about the bottomless barrel and then the bottomless bucket, I really love it. And there were honestly some classes where I felt that way. I felt like, what am I doing right now? I'm trying as hard as I can and nothing is happening. And I'm reminded specifically of my red sash test. which was not even close to as hard as my black sash test, but it was a hard test. It was 7 hours long. And before that was a meditation for 2 hours. It was the worst part of the test. I sat, and this was like, I think this doesn't escape you guys, this idea from this story about the power of will, and just like, I'm just gonna stick to this and prevail no matter what. Well, this was what my meditation was like. You know how sometimes you sit and meditate and it's really nice, and it's like I'm very comfortable, and I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm meditating, and it's like, yeah, my mind wanders, but I bring it back to the breath pretty easily and consistently. And the timer goes off at the end of the meditation, and you're like, that's it. Wow, it was such a nice meditation. It just flew by. And you get up and you go about your day, and everything's so nice. And then you have the other meditations, which are like most of the meditations, where you sit and it's just rough, and your mind is wandering the whole time. And it's like, this is a miracle if I can even come back to 2 or 3 breaths during this meditation. And sometimes your body is not cooperating. This was my red sash test meditation, because I had practiced on this beanbag chair, and I sat in Seiza. I was kneeling on the beanbag chair, and at first I was super comfortable. And in my previous meditations, I had meditated for like 2.5 hours, so I knew that I could do it. But on this day, the beanbag chair was not cooperating, and my knees started to slide on the beanbag chair as I settled into place over the first 10, 20, 30 minutes, and stopped moving. They went from here to here, and they settled right on that point where my hips were so unbelievably in pain. Like, you know that point where you need to pop something, but you're not allowed to move in meditation on the test. So my hip was in that place where it's so necessary to pop, yet not popping it. And I swear to you, I almost failed this test. This was the closest that I was to failing any test that I took with Sifu Brown, because I several times felt the urge to vomit from the pain. I was so sure, and I was in my head like, don't vomit, don't move, don't vomit, you're gonna fail the test. And the last hour of that meditation was me just gutting it out, refusing to move, refusing to submit to the pain of my hips. There was no meditation happening. It was the most brutal hour, I think, honestly, to this day of my life. And that goes to show, I mean, my life has been pretty cushy, but that was pure torture. And at the end of the test, Steve Brown comes in and he says, "Toyame!" And we all stop meditating, and everyone else just like kind of gently gets off their cushion, and I just throw myself on the mat, and I'm like writhing in pain. I'm like clutching my hips. And he asks everybody else, he says, how was your meditation? And they say, it was good, Sifu, it was good. And he comes over to me and he says, how was your meditation, sir? And I say, Sifu, that was the worst experience of my life. And he says, yes, sir. And then he moves on. And honestly, quite honestly, like the 7-hour test that we did a few days later was not that bad. I mean, people were actually throwing up during that test. One of my friends who was testing with me was violently ill, and he was snotting on me during the grappling part of the test. And I just kept going. I'm like, this is great. I feel wonderful right now. But that part of the test with meditation, Sifu says, if you can sit and meditate for X amount of time, the first one we do is for green sash, it's for an hour without moving. That's challenging. And it's one of two things happening. Either you are really meditating and you have been practicing consistently and you're good and you can get very deep and calm yourself so that it's possible to stay still, or you have an incredibly strong will. And it's one of those two things has to happen. It's not some third thing where by magic you pass the test. It's like you've been meditating for a long time and you were great in that meditation, which actually I had been meditating consistently for an hour or more. So it was not like I wasn't good at meditation, but it was in that day, it was pure will. And so sometimes that's what a test is. And if you are not being tested on a regular basis, and I mean in the dojo, of course, but outside the dojo in life, if you're not being tested on a regular basis, your life is not really happening. They say that God only gives us what he knows we can handle. We are only given as a test what we can actually pass or achieve or get through. And if you're not consistently being challenged, you're not really growing. You're not really giving yourself the opportunity to get better. And so this is what your meditation has to be like. This is what your practice has to be like. And I'll do my job and I will test you guys. Sometimes I'll hand you a piece of paper and you'll know exactly what's on the test, and it's still going to be a hard test. And sometimes I'll surprise you in class, or sometimes during the test I'll give you something. And that's more my part of it. And your part of it is to show up ready to go every day, every single class that you're in, and to show up for that meditation and keep yourself totally still. And this is one of the hardest parts of meditation, is just sitting still. And if you can do that, if you can just refuse to move, if you can refuse to just give in to the temptation to give up in that moment, and it doesn't always seem like giving up, but it is really. If you have an itch and you say, well, I'm just going to itch, it's not that bad. It's that bad. You've just given up on yourself in that moment in meditation. So, and yet if you never get to the point where it's so hard that you feel like you have to move, then again, you're not really testing yourself. So you have to do that on your own to some degree. And in the class, you are consistently tested, where it's like you're doing push-ups and you just know, I can't do one more push-up. And you say that to yourself. And then you have the choice, given that. I'm going to do one more push-up anyways, or I'm going to give up on myself. And your body's going to hit its limit at some point, but your mind reaches its limit way before that. So we're going to sit and meditate right now, and it's not going to be nearly that long, but you're still going to get to the point where either you feel like moving, or you feel mentally like, yeah, I'm sliding. And in that moment, you either bring yourself right back to the breath and stay with it, control your thoughts, discipline your mind, or you're lazy. It's always up to you. I can only yell at you guys so much. At the end of the day, you have to just do it for yourself. Sit comfortably.